We just want to say welcome. And we started the Aikido Solstice seminars as an initiative at the beginning of the pandemic, as an opportunity to get together as women senseis, and with certain sensibilities to both honor tradition and Aikido tradition, and also help to move the ball forward in terms of, sort of challenging, shall we say, hierarchies and the status quo as things have been, as well as really address very important, very relevant issues in the Aikido world and in the world today. So that will be happening during this session. We're really looking forward to it. I'll introduce Mallory Sensei. To introduce our first panel, we'll be looking at issues of diversity and inclusion in Aikido. We will also be, we're really happy to have Milu Naini Sensei here, who has founded Me Too Aikido to address issues of sexual and physical other abuse, power abuses in Aikido and the Aikido world. And then we're going to have a training in between those two sessions where we will take some of O Sensei's quotes into Waza. So with all that, Mallory Sensei, onegaishimasu.
Thank you. Just a huge thank you and sense of gratitude for everyone who is showing up on your screens today, especially as the pandemic has gone longer than any of us would have expected, showing up for important and difficult conversations and really being here with your presence is something that I am incredibly grateful for. And in particular, this conversation this morning, Aikido, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access, the new Aikido Idea Project, has been near and dear to my heart. And in the same way that Solstice started out 2 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, as we had this online forum to try to bring a little bit more attention to women on Aikido, conversations started for me back then, meeting a bunch of new people online in Aikido who I'd never met before. And for about 2 years, those conversations have kept going with the people that you're about to hear on this panel today. And we have just spent 2 years talking weekly about how do we make Aikido more inclusive? What does that mean? Defining terms. And in particular, I think, there's been a big conversation in Aikido for many years about our dwindling demographics. Everyone's worried about the future of Aikido. We have definitely seen our popularity decline, our numbers decline, but it's always been problematic to me that conversation doesn't happen in tandem with who's missing from our mats, right? So if the numbers are declining, and we also look at the fact that the demographics in America are radically changing. So by 2030, we are looking at the fact that the white population in America will no longer be the majority. Right. So if we are planning for our dojos and thinking about how to keep our art alive, thinking about diversity in Aikido, I think, is a critical part of the conversation. So it's not just about, are we a kick-ass enough martial art and why aren't we attracting people? It is about who has been missing from our mats historically. And so I think the conversation is not only just a good social justice conversation to be having, but I think it's a critical conversation for us to be having when we think about the future of Aikido growing and thriving, not only in America, but around the world. So with that, I am super excited to also say that part of launching this project, and this is really our launch today, because along with this conversation that I've been having with the people you're about to hear from on our panel, my dojo in particular, and I know I have a lot of Seattle Aikikai members on board, we have really been grappling with inclusivity issues and taking the time to write an inclusivity statement and really hammer it out for a while. And also we're lucky enough to apply for a grant and get it this year to not only just be talking about these issues, but to put some resources behind it. So that's part of the launch of this project, to say, not only do we just think, inclusivity is a good idea, but we really want to put not only our energy, but some resources behind it. And one of our big first questions was who should be at the table and who should be the leadership for asking these questions. And clearly part of that is stepping back, as a white majority, and also stepping back as the older generation. So I am completely thrilled to pass over this conversation to three young emerging leaders in the Aikido field. All three of them have incredible Aikido pedigrees, having started Aikido when they were children, basically, and also having incredible pedigrees in their social justice work and approach to how they're seeing the world. So without further ado, I'm going to first introduce our moderator, Evie Lynch, who will take it from here and introduce the rest of the panel. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Mallory. And thank you all so much for being here, especially to the Solstice Committee. Thank you for putting this event together, and happy solstice. So my name is Evie. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm so excited to be moderating today. Two of my favorite people, and they're super, they have so much to say. They're super passionate about this topic, and I'm just so glad that we're all here to hear this conversation. So when I first heard about the IDEA project, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access in Aikido, I had this sense of everyone keeps talking about that we need more of this. Now we have a way to really address it. And so I'm so glad that they are here to talk today. We have Sam Tatel using they, them pronouns from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we have Cesar San Miguel using he, him pronouns from Oakland, California. So with that said, let's let them introduce themselves. So Sam, you want to start things off?
Yeah, sure. As Evie said, I'm Sam. I use they, them pronouns, and I am on Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota and Anishinaabe lands, colonially named Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's cold, yo. And I started on the East Coast in New Jersey, my Aikido career, and then was in Uchideshi in New York City under Yamada sensei, and then I'm now in the Midwest. Don't know how I got here, but just wanted to thank everyone for attending, participating, and also because everyone here I've learned from, and I'm just really nice to see all your faces again. I'll pass it.
Good afternoon. My name is Cesar, he, him pronouns, and yeah, just following Sam's lead, I started Aikido when I was young, little here in Oakland, moved away, met Jan Nevelius and Sihan, and totally fell in love with his Aikido. And so I've been a student of his for a while, 7 years, 6 years. Anywho, back in Oakland, training as much as I can, and excited to be part of this project as well.
Great. So as we get into some questions and discussion with these two cool people, we have an amazing group today. So please use the chat, use that as a resource to share your thoughts, to have a conversation. Even if we can't be in the same room, we have this technology to allow lots of things to happen. So Mallory gave us an overview of what the Aikido IDEA project is. Now, I would love to hear from you two what it means to you personally. We're going to circle back around to what it can mean to the larger community as a whole, but let's start off with some personal stories. So Cesar, can you talk to that, please?
Sure. I have trained in two of the most diverse, most of my training has happened in two of the most diverse parts of the country, the San Francisco Bay Area and New York City. Over the 21 years, 90% of the time-ish has been, the mat has been entirely white except for myself. I didn't notice it as a kid. I'm noticing it a lot more now. And if you've ever been the only one of some demographic in the room, you tend to stick out. You tend to notice it. Even if those people don't mention it, you tend to feel other. Which is not to say I was never welcomed. I was always, most of the time, quite welcomed, felt welcomed. But I'm walking around my neighborhood, and why is my neighborhood all brown and Latinos and the mat isn't? I would like to see that change, not just for the future of Aikido, but for my own future in Aikido. And yeah, that's sort of the impetus for me.
Yeah, definitely. And similar to Cesar, I am mixed racially. I'm queer in all the other ways. And so that otherness was really noticed as I trained and practiced. I was ecstatic when I learned the word liminal, because that's how I felt all the time. I was neither here nor there. When I was in this group, I wasn't that. When I was in that group, I wasn't that. And so just wherever I was other. And for me, that is really tiring. And also there was a bit of dissonance as I was learning about Aikido and per se the philosophy of it, and why for me that didn't match up. The philosophy of bringing folks in and embracing conflict, and then not seeing that actually lived out on the mat. So I really want to not be the only one. That would be wonderful. And getting to see more of that as I travel and train and expand, and that support. I actually was lucky enough to have a few teachers of color, a number of them, but it's still a bit of a count on my two hands kind of deal. And the fact that I can kind of name them explicitly, I want changed. I want like a plethora of teachers that I can identify with, and not just kind of on a ethical, moral level, but also for the identities that I hold. And so being confused why I was other on the mat and felt so at home in the training, and yet kind of the dojo populace in no way represented me.
Thank you both for sharing. So we started to get into this a little bit with what you were saying, Sam. Can you speak a bit more to the bigger picture of the Aikido community as a whole, and how the Aikido Idea Project can apply to the larger community?
Yeah, I think it's really from conversations that all of us have been having, and now we're just coming together to have those conversations, really kind of the catalyst of the last 2 years, right? The murder of George Floyd. And this is not to say that it wasn't present before, because those systemic oppressions are very much present, but more people are looking and asking. And so this was the Aikido Idea Project as a focal point, because I know I've had hours and hours of conversations with folks, almost in the unpaid consultant realm of things. And so the Aikido Idea Project is, I hope for it to be a home for people to ask those questions and to learn together and to really expand, so that the onus isn't on those underrepresented communities. And for Aikido as a whole, as a martial art, I hope that people can just kind of bring together the circles of their training and how they live. Actually, Josh Gold helped me think about this a lot when I was a mentor for Budo Accelerator. And the panel I led was, or the workshop I led was everyday Aikido. And especially in the pandemic, when a lot of us weren't able to be present on the mat for safety reasons, just how do I live Aikido in my everyday life? And that was interesting for me because I grew up doing it. Like my lens is Aikido. So kind of almost trying to remove that and communicate what I saw, because I was in my mom's uterus, and then I was in a basket on the side of the mat, and then I was on the mat. So everything was Aikido. Like my first lens is Aikido. So trying to break that down and communicate what it's like for kind of the world to be my mat. And then I would love to see that for more folks.
So is there anything you want to say? Sorry.
I think Sam really covered most of it. And like Mallory was saying, the demographics of this country and of the world are changing significantly. And I hear all the time people complaining, oh, Aikido is not so popular, or we're losing students to MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. People don't want to learn how to fight. That's not why we're losing people. I think we're just not reaching people. And one way that we can change that will be to shift the culture and the language that we use, and to think about who we haven't invited into the room. and inviting them explicitly. That, I think, will turn the corner on this issue of a declining population in our art that we all love so much. That's why we're here. Yeah.
I will add to that why access is so important within the Aikido Idea Project, because I think there has been a lot of focus in or questions around diversity and inclusivity, but also you can invite someone in, but if it's impossible for them to get through the door, what did that invitation mean, right? You have to take away those barriers, and not only take away the barriers, but set up a platform and a stage that is reachable for folks. And there are so many reasons why people aren't in the dojo. Maybe their gi isn't clean because they don't have consistent access to a washer or dryer. Just really simple things and questions of why people aren't in the dojo, and how can we support more people, new people in like a generative practice, is why I think access is a really critical point to include.
It seems like there is no opportunity for the diversity, the inclusivity, the equity without the access, right? That's the first step, is what I'm kind of getting from you, Sam. And that seems like a really important thing to reflect on for all of us. Why? What are the barriers to that access? And in addition to that, why now? How does this project connect to the bigger picture of what's going on in the world with these equity movements? Cesar, do you want to start us off?
The only better time than now was last year, last decade, last century. We're late to the party. As far as these other movements, now is also strategically, if you're thinking about how do we get people in the door. I built a massage business mid-pandemic, from having 3 to 4 clients a week to being fully booked for months out with a wait list. And I did that by aligning my business very explicitly with these values. They speak to people. People are thinking about them more now if they weren't already. We've always been thinking about it. This is Sam in my life. I totally lost my train of thought. But that's why now. Now is the moment. I mean, the moment will also be tomorrow. But why wait? Because it was also last year.
I got really excited in one of our last meetings because I said a line, and like, it was a good line. And so I'll share it now. The fact that these, not just reflections, but these actions should be the present, and they need to be the future. Because as Cesar said, they should have happened a long time ago, right? We are a global community, and the way that our society has been set up, right? Productive oriented, capitalist, it's not for the health of who inhabits the world. And I think Aikido has been my, like, both frustration and aggravation in engaging with that global community, and also my like escape and really dedication to how I process all that. Once again, how I embrace that conflict, and not just that conflict, but myself. How do I marry all these parts of me and exist in one body? Supposedly, I have many, but how do I cohabitate and exist with myself, with all these identities, and seeing that in the world as well, knowing that I have not been torn asunder, like my flesh is still here, I'm still walking around, and wanting that for the world as well. These identities can exist, they can help each other thrive. And also I see Aikido as a really great tool and learning skill to help make that happen. So that's why I think the Aikido Idea Project, using Aikido, kind of that Aikido lens to make that happen, and to to share with that is, oh, that's how I live. And so I want more people not just to live like that, but to help other people live to their fullest as well.
I so clearly remember when you said that should be the past needs to be the future line, Sam, and I have it like underlined 3 or 4 times in my notes. We all went, wow. So you mentioned, you both touched briefly on Aikido being such a big part of your life and growing up with it in your body. How do we take the Aikido that's inside all of us, hopefully, with all of this practice and thinking about it, and how do we apply that to the conflicts in the world, to the challenges in the world? Because I think we all train, I think I can speak for everyone, in hoping to learn things, right? To learn whether it's about ourselves or about each other. And there's so much that could apply there to the challenges of the world. Can you speak to how Aikido can connect to conflicts in the world? Sam, you want to start us off?
I think the other one should go first.
Okay, Cesar, go.
We've all heard the line, oh, isn't that the martial art about using people's energy against them or their force against them? That's the lay people's understanding of what we do. It's correct on some level, I suppose. For myself, in my own practice, I redefine it as a practice in which to cultivate dignity, clarity, and compassion through conflict. Aikido is not relevant outside of conflict. We're learning, we're studying. I mean, argue with me if you want. I'm open to that discussion. It's a really interesting discussion. That's where I am right now. And if we can learn how to do conflict well through Aikido, that will change everything. And I think that's what we're studying. It'll change how defensive we get when we feel threatened or when we feel attacked for something that we feel we don't have any control over. We can learn how to receive a criticism in a way that doesn't result in us reacting and overpowering or shrinking and collapsing. Right? The principles apply across the board. Now the other one can go.
Can I just interject in there? Can you put the line about dignity in the chat, please? I want to be able to come back to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I was about to argue, but then I consider that I don't think conflict is solely negative. I think it's really necessary for growth, whether that's interpersonal, collective, or kind of internal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that was me processing that. And I think that Aikido is useful in these things because it helps us be more sensitive and nuanced and aware so that we can navigate that conflict in a more intentional way rather than just plundering forward. And sometimes, right, you have to hold the line, a temi, a mote, like you do need to enter, but you have to do that skillfully. And so how Aikido applies is knowing where your weight is, where your feet are, your connection to the ground. It helps us pay attention to all those elements within our training and that kind of internal awareness, and also picking up on other people's cues. That sensitivity and those like minute signals can ripple out, and you have to be able to use them to manipulate them, right, to the best solution, best effect. And so I love that so many martial arts, that practice of being really disciplined and noticing everything, and not with judgment or that was a good or bad thing, but just noticing. So if you react to something that someone said, how did your body react? We can't work to change a habit, break a behavior, if we don't even know it's there. So that's why I think Aikido is really valuable. As we go really big, right? First, you make really big circles, and then your circles can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they have a huge impact, even if they aren't visible. So that's, I think, where these conversations in Aikido really relate, and how I bring my training off the mat. I want to see that in my conversations. I want to see that in how I step into a room. Aikido helps me practice and maintain that on and off the mat.
So if we're talking about addressing things head on and really going forward with that irimi energy, how do we talk to people about this? One of the questions that I see popping up all over the place in my personal experience, in conversations with other people, is how do I talk to my chief instructor? How do I talk to my dojo? All these things about questions of diversity, equity. Who wants to go first? Can one of you talk about that, please? Cesar, go for it.
I meant Sam.
Then don't raise your hand.
Oh, that means I'm gonna go. Okay. Yeah, it's often a tricky question. I don't often have the bandwidth to beat around the bush. And so when I enter that conversation, I go straight forward, but I'm not always the most graceful, as Evie will point out to me on occasion about it. So it's something I'm also struggling with and something I'm thinking about. Thus far, the best advice I can give to people who are trying to ask these questions is to ask the question, who's not here? Why aren't they here? Why do we think that is? Because that is not an accusation. It may be a little bit easier for your senpai or your dojo cho or your community to accept and think about. Who's not here? What's our city's demographics? Our neighborhood's demographic? What's our dojo demographic? Why don't they match? Or what are we doing that is preventing that? Or what are we doing that's helping with that or addressing that? I like questions. When I teach, that's also how I teach. So
It is how you teach. Yeah, starting from really objective fact, I think, is helpful in the introductions. And so you can pull up the demographics of your neighborhood. Didn't even think of that. That's an amazing tip. And in talking to your chief instructor or dojo cho or a senpai, I think there's that same element of moving with care and noticing the situation and how you respond to it, maybe preparing. Deep breaths, we do a lot of deep breaths, right? Breathing is Aikido. And I personally am blunt. I was told that's one of my top qualities. But also, I've been thinking about the relationship between uke and nage a lot. And in these conversations too, when you see a senpai or a senior student, right, take ukemi for a new student, the new student's technique is better due to who's taking ukemi for them, right? They're learning through that. So that relationship, right, leading while still taking ukemi and helping them get in their bodies so that they can understand the movement, kind of be gently introduced to it, right? That line gets very blurred. Who's uke, who's nage, who's learning, who's leading. And I guess the main part I want to emphasize is that in these conversations, you're not alone. We're here and talking about this and sharing that we've been thinking about this and talking about it our entire lives. These conversations aren't new, and you're not alone in them. You're not the only one talking to your teacher about it. And there's like a community of support here for you to do that. That's another reason for this project. Just that feeling of being alone is also familiar to me. And really remembering that I'm not is super valuable, right? That comes from representation, meeting all these wonderful folks, staying in connection and conversation. You're not alone. It can be really scary, and there's a lot of other folks here for you.
I want to acknowledge the power dynamic inherent in communicating with your sensei. I have been in the position I'm sort of like a floating satellite student here in California of my teacher who's in Sweden. And so I'm in an interesting position where when I do go train at the dojos where I have relationships with people, I'm not the sensei's student. Of course, I'm very respectful when I'm in class, I do what they're doing and so on and so forth. But there's not this same power dynamic of, oh, they're my sensei, which presents me in an interesting position of being able to communicate with them differently. Always respectfully, they're still my senpai by many, many years. So when I was in the position one time where someone posted something, a chief instructor of a dojo posted something that really didn't sit well with me around Black Lives Matter. And I made it just a very succinct comment. And she took it down momentarily. She wasn't interested in talking with me about it, despite my offer. But what happened, what I want to point out is one of her students, who is a young woman, Southeast Asian, adopted, lives in, in that town, which is mostly white, including her parents. And this is her sensei, who's been her sensei for her whole Aikido career, her whole childhood into early adulthood. She didn't feel comfortable saying anything, but she was made to be very uncomfortable by that post. But because she's the student and that's her sensei, she didn't feel like she could say something. That is another problem that is related to this conversation. I believe we should feel safe talking to our seniors and asking questions and asking and giving feedback. Of course, there's always a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, or less graceful way to do it. But yeah.
To continue from there, your senior in Aikido is not your senior everywhere. I've been thinking a lot about static and fluid hierarchy, gotten very excited, but just the fact that I think Aikido and many martial arts culture has promoted this very structured and rigid hierarchy. And so right when you go out to eat afterwards, that hierarchy stays, even if you're not in the dojo. Whereas I wouldn't ask the sensei in an emergency room to perform a surgery. There's a surgeon on the mat. I'm going to ask them. And so that fluid hierarchy of, as you're having these conversations, really acknowledging what you're bringing to the table as well. You may be a professor in gender studies. You're the more advanced one here. So just knowing what you bring, and also, right, very kindly inquiring, pointing out the gaps in other people's knowledge may not be the most graceful way to go about it, but just recognizing for yourself that your teacher is not the expert in everything. They may be a great Aikido teacher for you, and that's fine. They may also have other expertise in other places, other fields. But anyway, just that it's not the end all be all who is at the top of like the far left corner of the name placards. That's not the only order there is in the world.
I do want to touch on Mallory's question in the chat real quick, because I love this comment, by which I mean I hate it. Everyone's welcome here. Then why isn't everyone here? You can say everyone's welcome. And to me, that sounds like, oh, everyone's welcome, including the people who think of me and my family as rapists and criminals and this and that, whatever Trump said about Mexicans. I don't feel welcome and safe in that space when that person is also welcome and safe there. We can't say everyone is welcome, because there are groups that have been historically excluded from everything. And that's the status quo. And that doesn't change unless we explicitly act to change it. So Everyone is welcome is a platitude that's meaningless to us.
And also that speaks to, I think, a lack of awareness, especially coming from many of the folks who say everyone is welcome, and right, not acknowledging those systemic oppressions and who have historically been marginalized. And saying that conflict doesn't exist doesn't actually do anything to change it or make it not exist. Once again, that dissonance of naming a harmonious practice and excluding people who per se break that harmony, rock the boat, that's not solving any issues. It's practicing this art of peace, and you're just keeping your own per se peaceful bubble and keeping all of the conflict of what you named as conflict out, which is very, I think, yeah, shows a lack of awareness, and also just, it's a lie. I think simply it's a lie, because you're not taking in the global dynamics. You're not taking in just everything. It's work. It's hard work, and I'm learning about so much too, especially the disabled community, and including folks in that, and how I can be more inclusive. Because, right, I have many identities. I don't hold them all, because I'm obviously not this, I'm obviously not that. And especially American exceptionalism, I think, as well too, culturally, I think it has been very twisted from a traditional Japanese martial art, and how it's been applied in America. Almost like, what are we keeping and why? What is traditional? What is useful going forward? What is kind of posturing as etiquette? But that's not helping folks get on the mat. That's not helping folks practice. That's not helping folks grow. Yeah. Evie, help.
So I think with any challenge, there are lots of different ways to address it, right? And you both talked a little bit about the big picture stuff, the communal aspect. And if we bounce off of the situation in which maybe a student doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't feel safe addressing something to their seniors, what can we do individually? You know, everyone, a community is made up of individual people, and what can one person at a time do to further these ideas in the world? Every time I ask one of you to go first, the other one wants to go first, so you two can figure it out.
Investigate yourself, and not in, I don't want this downward spiral of, oh wow, I've been a horrible person, I'm living a horrible life, I wasn't aware of all this, but really leading with curiosity of how, where are my blind spots? Excuse me, where am I, like, where am I not aware of what I'm doing, how I'm engaging? Like, I just use an ableist term, correct it, and just continue on. And that doesn't have to be in like a rush. I think there's a lot of stillness in that too, but also every part of this is a decision, and how you engage, where you engage, continuous practice, revisiting questions, and really making that intentional, like your practice, this discipline element of it, every day, every week, really focusing on a question. Also, right, being more aware and noticing when things are happening. Like, just next time you get on the mat, look how many people of color there are on the mat. Kind of step number one. Yeah, being aware of your situation and continuous, like, we're all students. That's what I love about Aikido.
Notice, ask questions, ask yourself in your life, oh, does my friend group happen to all look the same? Or is there some discrepancy in my values and who surrounds me? As far as individual things in the dojo, it's beginning to have that conversation, making observations. I would hope that everyone on the mat has at least one person that they've really connected to at their dojo. Talk with that person. Maybe they'll talk with someone else that they connected with, and so on and so forth. It's a community discussion, but it has to start somewhere. And that's a one-on-one conversation, maybe, after you've done some of your own introspection.
And also, right, it's the danger of being performative. And that's why I think that intentional revisiting and practice and correcting yourself all the time is really important, because it's not performative when it's what you're doing on the daily, what you're choosing to do on the daily. And so bring that Budo element, right? Practicing continuously in your life of just, what's the next book you pick up at the bookstore? Make a decision that furthers your own learning in that. Yeah, there are so many books you can. I'm also centering on bell hooks passing away, and just everything that I've read from her really touching me, and rereading all about love. So for a martial art that brings love into the equation a lot, how are you loving, showing your love, receiving your love? And I think just more people need to get at that.
So if we're talking I'm going to call them concentric circles of change. You've got the people that you connect with in the dojo that you talk to, and now we've got these big systemic barriers. For all of you who don't know, I think it's adorable. Sam and Cesar got matching tattoos of concentric circles, and so I just had to use that. But
based on our conversation with Nilu.
So you can hear more from the amazing Nilu later. But if we're looking at those systemic barriers, what can we do?
Put your money where your mouth is, for one. Who in your community is already doing this work? There's somebody. Support them in ways that they have indicated they want support. It's not useful to go and help someone by doing what you think will help them. It's presumptive. And in some ways, arrogant. There are resources there already. There are people doing this work already. Assist them. Ask how you can help. Ask how you can most effectively help. Use your own privilege, whether it's male privilege or white privilege or whatever it may be, financial privilege, and leverage that. In a lot of times that means financial support. If you can, if you have it. Otherwise, if you have a little bit of time, volunteer it. That's all I've got for the moment.
Yeah. And knowing that this work is not only in the Aikido community, I think what I'm noticing is the philosophies and people I'm drawn to are quite parallel in who I connect with. And so expanding upon kind of your own power to leverage whatever privileges you do have, I think asking in the dojo too, how can we remove those barriers? So Cesar said, right, kind of speaking with your wallet, and also allowing other people to engage and make supports where maybe they can't. Like, does your dojo have a sliding scale? And right, if you can be a person that sponsors someone for a month, that's amazing. And then even if that's kind of a round robin of just anonymous sponsoring of students, even if you don't have a whole setup of a sliding scale, you can even approach your teacher, just say, hey, someone that walks in and kind of you see them retract when a named monthly happens, like just say, we have an anonymous sponsor for you. Like you can come in our dojo and train. And also from the systemic barriers part of it, just representation of I am lucky enough to have so many people that I look up to that are queer, that are women, that are Black, that are brown, so many folks. And also I've collected those close to my heart over 2 decades of Aikido. I want someone that walks in the door to see that representation, because so many folks stopped training, turned away because they didn't see themselves on the mat. Some element of themselves, they didn't see that, and therefore they didn't think they were welcome. And what that looks like, your next seminar, inviting someone of color, really, right? If you're a dojo cho, using the power of like the space that you hold and your students to host someone that can really reinvigorate training and also inspire people, because, oh, they made it, as in like we're walking around and have survived 20 years of this and engaging in this practice. They're here and I can too. I think one of the notes that touched me most deeply from our recent visit to Seattle was actually after training with all the Tacoma folks at Ia and Eric's dojo. Just specifically, she shared that after our visit, many more like young queer folks were showing up for class consistently. And that made me so happy because it was a joy for me to train with them. And it is both reciprocal. Like I was fed and nourished because I got to train with all those young folks. It was really beautiful and helps give me energy for these conversations and this practice, because I don't want to be the old Black person behind a table. That's not why I practice. That's not why I'm putting my energy into this project. Yeah, I'd be cute with a walker though.
And I just want to say, for all of us who are on the call, the amount of time and the amount of yourselves that you've put into this project and to putting these ideas out in the world, thank you. I know how much you've done, and thank you to Mallory as well, even though she's not pinned. But your time, your emotions, your energy, and look, we've got currently 42 participants on the call. We're going to have a ripple effect, right? And so to continue to have these discussions happen, and I think I speak for everyone here when I just say we really appreciate it. So before handing things over to Mallory to wrap up, any last thoughts from either of you two? And it's okay if that's no.
Yes, it is. Just Mallory will speak a little more about the project, but the goal is to have a kind of a self-guided curriculum that people can use and write, because it is hard to find these questions. So helping you kind of with that step of here's something to reflect on, here's something to act on, and just a framework for that process to start that growth. I've been comparing many things lately to an arbor of there's a structure present, but you have to grow into it and you can grow past it. Right? We're living beings. We're not all one shape, but also reaching new heights and new sunlight, like that takes support. And so I'm really excited about where this project will go, and we're working on it.
My last comment will be, I've been having this conversation for many years now. This is the first time that it's being received with grace, with curiosity, and hopefully with some reaction, some response, some action. So that is both very affirming and exciting because I didn't necessarily really believe that we could make these changes. My mom tells me things are so much better now than they were when she moved here 30 years ago. And I believe her, but having hope is difficult. It's exhausting. So this is helpful.
Thank you. Thank you both. So handing it over to Mallory, she's got a little bit more information about what is the project, how to continue to stay involved. You may have seen in the chat, the website has been popped in a couple times, sign up for the mailing list, all that kind of thing. So Mallory, you wanna?
Yeah, just to jump in with some of our more kind of logistics brass tacks. Again, this really is the launch. This is the first time we are making this project public. So definitely there's more. Stay tuned, join the mailing list off of our website. But just 3 kind of next steps for us. One is always asking the question, is this project relevant and why? Like, what's the data that supports why this work needs to be done? Because there are some people out there who are like, Aikido doesn't have a problem. What are you guys talking about? So there was an initial survey done by Aikido Journal that came up with some pretty shocking numbers in terms of, just right off the top, only 16% of the Aikido population is women. 75% of the Aikido population is all white. Those do not reflect demographics in America, but I think we can dig deeper. So we want to actually do some research, put out some surveys about not only those demographics, but digging for other demographics about accessibility issues. Do dojos have programs for sight and hearing impaired people? To look at leadership. So, you know, how many people of color do Aikido, but how many people of color own dojos, right? How many dojos have really addressed LGBTQ issues, like having gender neutral changing rooms, actively using pronouns, and like even putting that on your registration form when people sign up. So things like that. So digging at who's doing that work, what still needs to be done. Maybe dojos are doing great work in this area and we just don't know about it. So anyway, so gathering data. So stay tuned, please participate in any survey outreach that we're doing. We'd love to have as many voices involved. And part of getting those voices involved is we're going to have a section of the website called Stories from the Mat. Because like for me, even when I started these conversations 2 years ago, to have some of the conversations that Sam and Cesar brought up to me, that I was like, wow, that was your experience on the mat, like learning about code shifting. Like I loved Sam at one point saying, you don't know that when I get on the mat, I have to pretend to talk white to you, you know, like, oh, super interesting for people to actually start to learn about those things. So we want to put stories from the mat on the website, and to not only just ask under marginalized people of color to like just volunteer their time for those stories, but to pay them for them. So we are going to be creating a story bank so that there's some real data for people to understand why this is an issue for so many people, why they feel like the other on the mat. So definitely engage with us on that if you have a story to tell. Cesar, jump in on that. Yeah.
I want to make one point. Oftentimes what happens with these sorts of initiatives and programs and conversations, the burden falls on us, the people of color, the queer folk, the etc., right? Disabled, so on and so forth. This isn't our problem. We're not the ones creating unfriendly, unwelcoming spaces. We want to feel welcome. We want to be part of the group. Maybe. The onus is on you. Whether you're the dojo cho, or you're a dojo of all white people, don't single out your one Black student and say, hey, can you take the lead on this project? Because we do that work all the fucking time. Allow us to volunteer if we want to, but don't pick one and say, hey, you do this. That's all.
Yeah, I think we're being very cautious too, that there's a real tendency, I think, to tokenize the few people of color that we have as the spokespeople, you know, for this. So being really conscientious of that for sure as well. So collecting stories, collecting data, and then absolutely education. So there's been some advice here about reading books, educating yourself. A section of the website is going to be on the best resources we can put forward, as well as a curriculum to put yourself through. And in particular, like you can go and sign up for a diversity training, but we have all been in conversation about the fact that in dojos, because of some of the inherent hierarchy, that there's a specific level of engaging with this topic that's unique to our practice in the martial arts. So we're going to tailor that kind of training to that, and specifically also have a lot of resources, sample inclusivity statements for dojos to look at, sample just non-discrimination policies, codes of conduct that will be a little bit bigger from what's historically been put out there. So training and resources. And then the third component is, again, as we have said, putting your money where your mouth is. So we are really excited that we have some money, a pot of money to basically share out. So we are going to be providing a program of mini grants to help other dojos come up with an inclusivity project of their own. So I love asking this question. They would be grants up to $1,000. What would you do with $1,000 to make Aikido more inclusive? We don't have the answer to that. Like, we are really wanting to engage the community in that conversation. Like, what does it mean? How do we leverage having some resources? What could you do? It could be a small little project for a dojo. It could be a big project. But we want to really start and ignite some creativity with some resources behind that. So doing the research, creating education and a platform for resources, and then sharing out some cash to basically create some kind of spark for best practices that could help all dojos grow in terms of the issue. So that's the big picture of where we're going. And again, this is just the beginning of it. So there's a huge welcome out to everyone who's been on the call to engage with us. I know we haven't left a whole lot of time, but maybe we do have a couple moments if there are questions that have emerged in the chat, or anything really quick that someone wants to throw out to get before we wrap up.
Our website has an email address and a contact form, as well as a form to fill out to join our mailing list, where we'll be announcing when these things are ready, when the page with resources is ready, when the page is with stories has more stories, when so on and so forth. So mailing list right now, it's not all there yet, but to know when it is there, that's how you'll know.
So we are just about out of time, but I think pretty much everyone on this panel is going to be sticking around for the rest of the amazing sessions that are coming up next. So if you have things that you want to say in the chat to continue the discussion, pop them in. Everyone will be watching that. And thank you all again for being here. You three for all of your work on this. The Solstice Committee, thank you for that. Let's go on to the next cool stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, all four of you. And let's all say a big domo arigato for this panel and for the work that you're all doing.